everybody to our celebration of your revolution. This is not the revolution in general, this is the revolution as pertains to us. Because local history is an entree to American history. And Richard and I, Dr. Hull, where are you? He's the town historian, I'm his deputy historian. And he is the guy who looks at the stars and says, here's where we're headed, folks. And I'm the person that looks through the microscope and says, what a cool little thing. So between us, we're a pretty good pair.
Good combination.
Yeah, we work together well. I'll try to talk directly to this. If you can't hear me, just wave from the back, okay? Hopefully we'll get feedback. The cameras you see are not because I'm famous or a camera hound. This is a crew from the high school who's come in and they're practicing their craft with us today. And the other gentleman is Gary Randall, who is one of the Florida historians. Now, before we get started, you noticed when you came in, I had something about Native American heritage up there. It is Native American Heritage Month. I don't know if you noticed, but the signature that was showing on the one slide is the signature of the local chief Chuckus from the way we owned a patent from 1703. And on some of your chairs, there are bookmarks. Somehow we scheduled Ruben Fast for us only a few days after this presentation. And he will be talking about Native American culture and heritage and contributions to how America came to be. And that's this Thursday. I urge you to come. He's a Native American who came here from the West. He was raised on the Standing Rock Reservation, and he's an awesome educator. He goes and does classroom visits and all around the Eastern Seaboard he does things. We're really lucky. He lives here with us in Warwick now, so we're really lucky he's here. So we're here to talk about the revolution here. And our project started because I wasn't interested in history. I've never been interested in history. I'm only interested in Warwick. So that's how come I go from the particular to the specific. And I'm going to let these two ladies come in. Come on in, Hopi. Come on.
Sorry.
Thanks for
your patience. Thanks for your patience.
So, all right. All right, so we're talking about General John Hathorn and the people who lived here. Is there anybody here who has never heard of John Hathorn? I talk about him a lot, so there are people that cross the road when they see me coming at this point. Not to my side. Does everyone know where the house is? Please raise your hand if you don't know where his house is. Okay, everybody knows where the house is, that's good. They are proceeding with making that house into a historic venue for the area. They've put a lot of money in. These are private owners who came along and looked at that house falling down and said, that will be a wonderful venue for people to come and visit. Next year, that will open as a historic themed restaurant and be able to go in, and I may be there bothering them and raise a glass to the locals. So this is the context of why we're doing these kinds of projects. We're only 5 years away from the semi-quincentennial of the nation. You want to say it with me? That's a mouthful. And places like Philadelphia and Boston are already so far along in their plans, you would not believe it. Because they know a cash cow for history when they see it. We are just beginning to ramp up our efforts, and I'm happy to say that the Orange County Legislature has approved the formation of our commission for the 250th, and they have allotted some funds to get that off the ground for the next budget year. So the Orange County Historian's Office will be coordinating that. A lot of you are already interested in history, and a lot of you know that when you try to talk to kids about history, their eyes glaze over within about 10 seconds. So when I go into the classrooms, my goal is when I go in and say, where'd the revolution happen? And they tell me Philadelphia and Boston. But by the end, I say, where'd the revolution happen? They're able to say, here, because that's true. I urge you to get involved with any efforts you see starting to ramp up. It's going to take quite a bit of planning to pull off a really big celebration for the Mid-Hudson. So I'm here under false pretenses. This is not actually the product of just my efforts. There are a lot of people over 20 years, 2 decades, of looking for documents about Warwick and the Revolutionary War and pulling the information out. So I'm going to call some folks' names to raise their hands. You don't have to stand. One of the people who helped a lot was Deborah Sweeten. Would you raise your hand, Deborah? Teresa Mealy. Everybody else who helped with getting the data together over the past 20 years that's in this room, please tell me where you are. I know who you are, so don't pretend that you didn't help. This is partly your fault, too. Okay. Anybody who has ever gone out on a Sunday afternoon to learn about the Revolution in Warwick, please raise your hand. Congratulations, you're all in. You're all friends of Hathorn. So people from hundreds of miles away helped with developing the data. So one of the things that we try to do in the Friends of Hathorn House is look at history and see where the parallel is to our own lives. Because history only becomes relevant when you can see the connection to what you've been through or what your community is going through. So I love this quote. This is John Adams. He is in Paris trying to negotiate the peace. He is writing about the engines of fraud and imposture in the media. He's writing home and he's complaining. They're putting all kinds of crazy stuff in the papers. They're trying to influence opinion in our country, in the papers. Foreign interference, fake news, 1783. It was probably written on the walls of Pompeii, couldn't I? Politics is politics. So what did we actually know? When we started out this project, almost exactly 20 years to the day, I was contacted by Gail Hathorn. They were going to have a reunion over at the Hathorn House of the Descendants. And they said, can you put together a booklet? Sure, fine. He's a big name. Easy. Wrong. We had one essay written by Ferdinand Sanford who gathered together what he could from the old published tomes and a couple little facts, and that was it. And I realized that much of what we knew and had carried forward about Warwick and the Revolution was merely a drop in the bucket. That there was a much larger story to be told here. So we started digging. We had some stories of veterans carried forward primarily by the families that had persisted in the valley. We had some knowledge of where a few people that were here in the Revolution lived, like Baird's Tavern, that's the iconic one that everyone thinks of. We had several historical markers that in 1933 they erected when they documented the Continental Army going through. We had lots of stories, but they really couldn't do the fact-checking back then. They didn't have access to the kinds of tools that we have now. So what we were looking for was recognition for our founding veterans. So when we started, it took quite a bit of talking to people to get them to understand that talking about the veterans of the Revolutionary War means you're a veterans organization. The reason why we kind of see them as these shadowy figures is because most of their voices went silent. It's so long ago, they're almost creatures of myth. So that's what we're striving to do, is bring forward their memories so we can see them as people like us. We also, when we started, whenever we talked to any of the historical sites about the revolution that are here in the Hudson Valley, most of them said, oh, well, the militia, they kind of helped in the mountains a little bit. They were around a couple of days, but it really was the kind of army that did everything. Well, there was very little recognition for the people who served in Hathorn's militia. In our community, a handful of people served in the Continental Army. Hundreds of men served in the militia. So there's a much larger story to be known from the militia's involvement. So as we started to look at the documents, first we went to the existing published book. And I'm going to talk about method a little bit, then we'll get to stories. But in the 1880s or so, through about 1910, 20, 30, they would publish these volumes that were transcriptions of documents about the revolution to get the word out. We started with those, and those are some of the sources that Ferdinand Sandberg had used. Then, because things are scanned now, and a lot of things you don't have to drive hundreds of miles to get to, we went to fold3.com and ancestry.com. The library offers both of those repositories to you for free. You don't have to subscribe to them. You can't go just to those websites. You have to go in through our portal, through the library's website, to find a place to enter your barcode. Fold3 you can get to from home, and Ancestry you have to use here in the library. That's what our license is. But we are having a couple workshops coming up that can show you how to do that. If you call the help desk, if you're sitting at home going, can't remember, call the library's help desk and say, how do I get into that? They can just walk you through. You click here, you're in. So we want you to use it as much as possible. The queries we've had from folks applying for the Sons of the American Revolution and the Daughters of the American Revolution have doubled already. People are starting to get ready for that big 250th. So getting information out there is really important. Okay, so this is what many volunteers and Deborah Sweeten read hundreds of pages that look like this. Hundreds. This is a very well-written one. That's good handwriting for the late 18th century. That's very readable. So each person who applied for pension from Hathorn's militia, there were between 15 and 60 pages of handwritten legal depositions to wade through to get the information. So that is hundreds and hundreds of hours. That's why it took 20 years. Many people would go into these pension applications to do their own family history. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first project to look at a cluster of the militia and recreate what they were doing from those pension applications. So, this is actually Azariah Ketchum. Most of you probably know that Azariah Ketchum's house is right down the road from here, and it's a museum building of the Warwick Historical Society. And he was applying for a pension. When they finally approved pensions for the militia, raise your hand. Do you think it was in the 1790s? Was it in the 18-teens? 1832 is when they could finally get a pension. 50 years after their service was when they could finally ask for recognition from their country. Of course, many of them did not survive that long. So we have found a total of about 80 pensions of people who served in Hathorn's militia. And that's all we could find out of over 400 men who served. So you immediately see one of the problems with understanding the revolution for the younger generation. Can kids who are under 20 read that?
No.
Can millennials read that? Maybe. They stopped teaching cursive in the schools. The pendulum is starting to swing back a little bit now. because they finally have studies showing it's good for your cognitive development to have a linkage of letters like that. So that has huge implications for the understanding of our history, that people are losing the skill of reading cursive. Maybe they're never going to write it. Let's face it, you can type it 6 times faster than you can write longhand. But when they go to clean out houses and find these papers, they are not going to know that that's your Uncle Mike's letters from World War II. So what I try to preach to people is say, type out a transcription of the letter and keep it with the letter, so that when that time comes, they know that's important. And if they're not going to keep it, if they don't care, give it to somebody else, give it to a repository. So this is new information. This is not just retreading same old, same old. What you find when you look at this is the real stuff. On the bottom, when you want to look at those tones, you can see I have 3 bullets there: books.google.com, archive.org, and happytrust.org. Most things published in the United States that are out of copyright, you just go in, you read them. You search them by keyword. Say your name is Abraham Schmidt. You look for Abraham Schmidt, you find his stuff right in there online. You don't have to drive around. So that's one reason why now we have over 400 primary documents talking about John Hathorn. Before we probably had maybe 20. Right? They're out there. Okay, this is an example of the timeline. You know yourselves. Once you got too many things going on, you can't organize it. This is my husband, by the way, Jerry Coots. He's a published author and researcher. I said to him, what am I going to do? This is like herding cats. It's all over the place. He said, you do a timeline, sorted chronologically. So you have a date, a place, notes on what that primary source document is telling you. And as soon as you start doing that with 10, 20 documents, the story starts to rise up. It's amazing when it happens. What's happening at the same time? Other things are happening. That's how that book came to be written. In this case, green is Hathorn's words himself, things he wrote. Red is something with a negative implication. As I said, for Hathorn himself, we have over 800 things, and counting. So the veterans, when they finally sat down, 1832 and older, trying to get their couple of dollars a year from the government, and you have to understand, they were paid during the war to some extent, but the script that they were given devalued so rapidly that by the time they went to use it, often it was only a tiny bit of what they had been given. Inflation was terrible. So they really never got much of anything for their service. This is William Knapp, born in 1755 in Warwick. He was called into service in the militia under Captain John Minturn, and a family member corrected me that that is the correct way to say Minthorn or Minturn. It's not, it's Minturn. John Hathorn's regiment, he names Stepan, Haverstraw, Chester as 3 of the places he served while in the militia. And he was out for that term of service about 6 weeks. Can't remember the date. Can you remember the exact date of Cousin Tilly's wedding 50 years ago? You remember exactly how funny they looked when they danced, right? So that's what they would remember. So he remembers we took some tea and we took some rum. That was part of the booze we got from the enemy. And the reason they would say those things is because then the officials would go to the official records and say, oh, that must have been this year, because they would have a record of when those goods were seized. They're trying to prove their service. They had to because they never got records to begin with. It was during war. They rotated in 6 weeks, out 6 weeks, in a month, in 3 months, out 3 months. There was paper shortages. Even very important people are writing during this time period saying, can't really explain now, no paper left. That would be like John Adams or somebody. So these guys didn't even have access to paper a lot of times. So either that or they lost them, they moved, By the time they're old, they're usually not their own heads of household. They're living with an adult child, family. There were fires. They somehow lost what few records they had. One of the things that's great and horrible at the same time, when you go into these images of the pension accounts, there's their certificate that there's their commission signed by George Clinton or an important person that they sent in and never got back. Kind of horrible, but also kind of good because now it's there for us to find. So they're old. They're trying to find other really old guys to say, can you write a letter for me? I need somebody to prove that I was really there. So these guys are up in the southern tier. They're out west. They're down south, somewhere in Virginia. They're all over. They're writing a letter to each other saying, can you go before the judge and do a witnessed letter for me? So that's why those pension applications get to be so long, because they're trying to find those old guys. For Warwick pensions, for these men, up to 50% after all that were not approved. There's a big R in front of them, rejected, got nothing. The VA has had real issues since day one. They got nothing. So this is not John Hathorn. This is the only image we have that suggests what John Hathorn looked like. And this is a composite done very long after his death. But it's something to look at. And what we know of him from the documents is that his entire life he was respected, honored, and favored. The first document that we have of him is when he's an adult in 1772, marrying Elizabeth Welling of the Welling Homestead, which you know where the double S barbecue place is on 94. The fields and the house that sits back from 94, that was where the Welling household was. And you can see that that's the neighboring property to the Hathorn property. So he came probably to work on the border between New York and New Jersey. We know kind of what he looked like from a verbal description. We know that he was a real go-getter because he was a newcomer, and all of a sudden he's marrying the favored daughter of one of the most prominent farmers in the whole place. So you know that they knew this was a guy that was going to go places. He's Warwick tax assessor in 1775 already. He only had come a few years before that. Now, who exactly he thought he was being a tax assessor for is kind of up to question. Because that shadow government that was rising to replace the British government is already starting to get going. He was an ardent patriot, so who exactly he thought he was keeping a record of who could pay the taxes and where the able-bodied men were is kind of interesting to think about. So, he, during his entire career, was military title, civil appointments, elected office. All three happening at the same time for most of his adult life. He was the original multitasker. Today, we would probably put him on Adderall, I think. But thank goodness they didn't know about that then. So we know he had boots on the ground because his men mentioned his being actively with them as a commander at many of the places they are. We know when he was sitting on the New York State Legislature, he was there for their first meeting in Kingston as a representative. So he commanded in battle. So well respected is he that after the war, the New York State Legislature is finally going to sit down for the first time. Okay, we did it. We're our own country. Where do we go from here? John, you be Speaker of the Legislature in New York. He was helping set the agenda. So you know that he must have been a well-liked man. And they knew he was a worker bee. They probably said, here, let John do it. He's going to get that done. Okay. So how we got from there to almost letting his house fall down is kind of a story in itself. In the book, I address what I think happened, because by the time I'm starting to look at the Red War in Warwick, what I hear is he was commander of the militia. They kind of guarded the mountains a little bit. He lost the battle of Mincing. That's what I heard. So somehow, over the years, we lost track of him as founding father. So now we're going to start to talk about some of these stories. And when you can relate a story of something that actually happened during the Revolution to your neighborhood, it becomes real to you in a way like nothing else can. So we have some folks here who are related and descendants of Captain James Burt. We have the McFarlands here. We are standing on the Burt farm, Captain James Burt's farm. This is part of it. The house is on 17A around the corner. There's a historical marker there. Now you see that very scratchy portrait up there? That's from a daguerreotype that I was allowed to photograph many years ago. It's still in the family. Daguerreotypes are those things that are in gold frames that look kind of like a mirror or a hologram. It's really hard to capture an image from there. To the best of my knowledge, that's the only veteran of the Revolutionary War that survived to have his photographic portrait taken. Wow, right? He was there. He did these things. That's a painted portrait of him, which I think is still in the family. I'm not sure, but I think the family still has it. You can see it's the same man. So this story, and some of you have heard me tell this story because it's one of my very, very favorites, was told by him many, many times, and it got written down at least 4 times. He was young when he joined. He was born in 1760, so in 1776 when he joined, he was only 16 years old. So he lived well into the next century to tell these stories and have them be written down. It's first written down in 1832 by himself in very brief form in his pension account. And then later, during his lifetime, Edgar writes it in his History of Orange County in a much more expanded form. Now, do you think James Burt, Assemblyman and Senator, let Edgar write stuff that wasn't true according to his memory and publish it? I don't think so. So I consider that a primary source because he would have made sure that Samuel Edgar got the story correct. It's repeated in Rutherford and Clark, History of Orange County. Some of the details shift, but it's basically the same story. Later on in 1888, a member of the Benedict family, she uses a pseudonym, but I believe it's Eliza Benedict Hornby, who is the author of Unrolled Roof Trees, and she was a great recorder of detail, which becomes very important for the story. Here's the story. One dark and rainy night in the village of Warwick. The rain is pouring down, not a soul is to be seen in the entire village. There's a group of Tories up in the mountains. They love to go through those mountains because nobody could see them. They're on their way down to New York to join the enemy. Somebody, who that somebody is, we don't know. Let them know there's a silversmith by the name of Johnson who lives in the village of Warwick. Under cover of night, they steal down from the mountains. The rain is covering the sound of their movements, and they break in to Johnson's house. A fight ensues, and he is wounded in his shoulder and can no longer defend his home. And they proceed to grab up everything of value in his house. There's a very valuable sword in there, and they get that too. Suddenly, above the sound of the rain, they hear some voices and they think, we better get out of here. So they grab everything, they run back as fast as they can up to the mountains. Very nearby, Daniel Burke hears the hue and cry that there's a murderous attack in the village of Warwick. He runs around the corner to his brother's house, Captain James. Captain James is in the militia. He says, you gotta warn the guys out, we gotta go right now. What happens to tracks when it's raining? All trace of these robbers will be gone by daylight. So, in the darkness and the rain, the militia is called out. Captain James knows time is wasting and he really can't take the 20-25 minutes it'll take to muster the guys. He goes by himself to follow them and lead the way. He's creeping along, and as he's creeping along, he suddenly hears snap, snap, snap. sound of guns misfiring. He brings up his gun to shoot back in their direction and realizes if his gun does fire, the flash will reveal where he is. He lowers his gun and waits for the men to come up. He names the men, 7 or 8 men, including Azariah Ketchum, go with him. All night long, through the mountains, not on trails, through the brush, they are tracking this gang of robbers, trying not to lose the trail. It's dark, it's still morning. Towards daylight, they come upon a group of Continental soldiers, and they say, we've been after these guys for miles and miles. We can't let them get away. They probably killed this guy back in Warwick. So the Continentals say, okay, you go down this side of the mountain, we'll go down that side of the mountain, and we'll get them. And that's what happens. As the robbers have flung themselves down to grab a bite to eat, the group converges, there's a battle, several of the Tories are killed. A large number of them are taken prisoner and a few escape. The ones that escape head down further towards New Jersey, trying to get to New York, but they're mostly caught up with. So now they're exhausted, and now they've got this bunch of prisoners. Prisoners of a crime that happened not in the Continental's jurisdiction, but in the militia's jurisdiction. So the militia's in charge of getting them back up to the jail at Belgium. As they're coming back up, and you can imagine what state they were in. They're probably covered with mud and exhausted. James Byrd says, wait a second. This is where I heard them fired at me. They were trying to kill me. He's only about 17, and the other guys are a little older than him. And they're like, you were just scared. They didn't stop to try to get you. They were running. Nonetheless, he convinces them to go over there and look. And here is a bunch of the stuff from Johnson's house cast aside because as soon as they knew there was pursuit, they lightened their load. So he was vindicated that he had told the truth and he hadn't just been seeing something that wasn't there. He told this story a lot. He liked that story. So these are the bare bones of the story. That's a great story, isn't it? Yeah. How do we know that's all true, that he wasn't just telling about how great he was? These are the bones. Silversmith named Johnson. Captain Burt helped track them. Daniel Burt helped warn. And then in 1888, Eliza Benedict Hornby, bless her soul, recorder of minutia, said that Burt told her he lived where Mrs. Pearson lives. All we have to do is find out in 1888 where Mrs. Pearson is, and we know exactly where that happened. So, first, we look at the newspapers that we have, scanned newspapers. We can go in and do phrase searches now. Mrs. Pearson lived in the house that was called the United States Hotel for many years. We have the whole history of who owned the house, starting with Daniel Olmsted, who was also an owner of the 1810 house. So we know that's a very old residence area. And then she corroborates that he was a silversmith that lived there. So we have, his name, we know his occupation, now we know where. Did that story give us a date? No date attached to that story. When you look in the pensions, Joseph Todd says he went in pursuit of the Tories who had wounded one Captain Samuel Johnson in Warwick. From his statement that he remembered as an old man, we know this guy's first name. His name is Samuel. We have now a name. We look a little bit further in James Burke's pension, and he gives us a date, March of 1777, so early in the war. This is happening in the village of Warwick. He says they went all the way down to Newfoundland where they finally caught up to the guys. That's how far they marched in the rain. So now we've got a date. We look at the other primary sources. You see Benjamin Tustin is the colonel of the 3rd Orange County militia. Now that we know where to look, we can see he's reporting that also, that they found a bunch of Tories and that they were taken to Goshen jail. So we know that the militia brought them up here to Goshen jail. And something else happened there. Maces, which was a little ways above Greenwood Lake, there was another large group of Tories moving through at about the same time. Now, one of the other things you can find in these pensionist stories, of course, that are nowhere else, so hard to read, but he says he went in pursuit of the Tories who had killed 2 men belonging to the same company with himself by the name of John Clark and Henry Ross. And then that happened in Warwick as well. Now, this is the only place where we hear about Henry Ross getting killed. But we do know a lot about John Clark. John Clark was a man who was part of Hathorn's militia. These are the locations that we've now proven actually happened, an engagement between British people and Americans in the village of Warwick in the Revolutionary War. We know there's Tavern number 1, number 2 is the Noble Station, number 3 is the Shingle House Museum where Daniel Burt was, all the way around the corner, number 8 is the Burt Farm. So that's an actual Revolutionary War engagement map that we have now because of documents. Isn't that awesome? We need to tell the kids this. I didn't do all this. All these volunteers who helped pull these documents together, they did this. So now we have another sort of interesting story we know about. This map is one of the maps drawn by Robert Erskine, who was George Washington's mapmaker. He lived nearby. His homestead was Ringwood Manor, so he knew the Warwick area well, and he drew it several times for Washington. He was noting roads you can move troops on. He was labeling resources that would be useful to troops or to couriers. So he doesn't show every dwelling, he just shows the ones that are of interest or will be useful. So this map is in the book. I explain every single thing in there. I call it the Rosetta Stone because from those stories you can understand a great deal about what's happening in Warwick history from the labels that Erskine put on this map. It's pretty astonishing when you talk to the New York Historical Society about, has anybody tried to pull the stories out of the maps? They're like, what are you talking about? Like, people are not using this resource. At the bottom, number 6, very hard to see, it says Clark's. That's a very distinctive doorway. And Debbie there helped us figure out where that house is about. Somewhere in the vicinity of Charming Road, Dutch Hollow intersection where you go up to Sterling. That's where Mr. Clark lived. He was in Hathorn's militia. I'm not going to tell you the whole story of what happened to Mr. Clark. He was murdered by the sons of Claudius Smith in February of 1779. Claudius had been hung in January. They caught up with him. So they busted into Clark's house one night and dragged him outside and shot him. Didn't have any chance to defend himself. We know every single detail of what happened because the sheriff went over and took down the deposition from his wife, who remembers everything. It was so seared in her brain forever. To add insult to injury, this gang of outlaws pinned a note to the dead guy's coat that the sheriff transcribes for us. And it says basically, you murdered our father. For every one of us you kill, we will kill 2 of you. That happened in what later became the town of Warwick as well. Wouldn't it be great to see if we can find the foundation of that house and make sure there's a historical marker there? A map drawn by Robert Erskine just shortly after this changes that label to Clark, murdered here. It might be the only incident in all his maps where he's recording the sequence of something that happened in his maps. That's completely awesome. So, now we're not going to tell all those stories. We're going to talk about number 10 in the middle there, the Cedar Swamp. And why do you think he put Cedar Swamp on there? Any ideas? Does he like cedar? I don't know. Right. try to get over to Sterling, which is over here, and you were over here with your troops, what would you try to do? You would try to go right through there, wouldn't you? So you had the label, by the way, this is a swamp here. Don't even try to go through here. What else is there below Wickham Lake now? Right below Wickham Lake, you know this. It's a park, it's a prison, right? Have you ever noticed a historical marker on State School Road? No? Where the mansion is?
Is that the one about Burgoyne's Army?
No.
Oh.
It's about this guy. Well, I won't tell you about him, but it's about the Wisners. One of the two big Wisner tracks went all the way from Wickham Lake down to where the Wisner's Road is. So that was Wisner property. And Robert Erskine knew very well who lived there where number 10 is. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So now we come to the Wisners. So we got any Wisner descendants in the room? Any Wisners? Okay. Well, they were here very early. So in the blue boxes, those are all Revolutionary War veterans that were Wisners. That's only some of them. There were many, many people who served in the militia in the Continental Army from that family that's still in town today. The red box is Henry Wisner Sr. Henry Wisner Sr.'s home that he grew up in is by the intersection of Big Island Road and Wheeler Road. There's a historical marker there on Wheeler. And Max Franish, who is a scout, restored it for us last year. It didn't even have a tiny little bit of paint left on it. It's in terrible shape. Henry Wisner didn't serve in the military, but he was on the first and second Continental Congresses. And he grew up in Warwick. And when he was an adult, he moved a little further toward Goshen, so Goshen says, he's ours. I've convinced them that we can share. There's enough Henry Wisner to go around. So he's a very important guy. He was there when they voted for independence. But being a man of action, he ran back to Orange County to start ramping up gunpowder. And 3 or 4 days later, when they had the copies of the Declaration ready to be signed, he wasn't there anymore. So his signature isn't on the Declaration. It is on the Olive Branch petition that they had sent before that to George, saying, "Dear King George, we really don't want to do this. Could we work this out?" And he rejected it, but Henry Wisner's signature's on that one. So we have this cluster of ardent patriots. Now I'm going to tell you a story now that was forgotten. And I asked lots of people who knew a lot about family history, and they didn't know it either. It's a story that doesn't have a happy ending, and some people would prefer that I not tell you this story. But I have a real feeling for this gentleman. And I think he deserves not to be forgotten. So where that historical marker is on State School Road, you'll see this marker, Wisner Tract, Captain John Wisner, born 1722. So he's an old guy pretty much by the time the Revolution rolls around. He was in the French and Indian War. We have his service records. He was a captain then. In the course of our researches, we found a handwritten battle report by him about a deadly skirmish along the Delaware River. His house stood right in front of what today is the mansion, and they're doing all kinds of renovations there. In front of that mansion building is where his stone house stood. So he was a seasoned commander. He had been in deadly combat. He was a mature man. We know those things about him. We know that he would have known George Washington's record during the French and Indian War. Do you guys know George Washington's record during the French and Indian War? So a couple of things didn't work out quite so good. So as a person who has experience, he's tapped. He's part of the pulling together of the Continental Army. He and his men are told, go down to New York. We're going to get everybody down to New York. That's where the big thing's going to happen with the British. So they're up around by New Wisdom. And apparently the snow's really deep. So I said, well, okay, it's going to be a while till we get down there. And the Continental Army officers, who most by and large have far less experience than him, say, we'll march down the ice of the Hudson River. 2 pension accounts talk about them marching down the ice of the Hudson River in formation, all their weight concentrated in formation, because that's the way a military discipline happens when you're marching. You can imagine, you're marching, and the ice starts to go like this. The men scatter and spread eagle, and it doesn't break and they don't drown. But you can get inside the head of Captain John Wisner now and going, I'm sure these people know exactly what they're doing, right? Goes down to New York. He and his men are in the battle for New York. Battle for New York's going real terrible in 1776. They're driven off of Long Island. They're driven onto Manhattan. They're driven back up Manhattan. And now Washington's headquarters is at Harlem Heights. We're already all the way back up to Harlem Heights. Washington stands there by the East River and looks out and says, what's that island? Oh, that's Montresor Island. The British have it now, right? Yeah. We're going to get it back. Why? They're losing. They're going to have to leave. He taps Captain John Wisner and some other militia guys. Well, they weren't really militia. They were quasi-continentals at that point. So there's something like 240 of them, and they've got 4 church boats. Over 200, 4 boats. So I looked up what a troop boat looked like, where you were being used in the shallows so the guys could get out. Just a way to keep dry while you're going across. They were sandwiched in like sardines. Night falls. They start to move across quietly. Somebody forgot to tell the American sentries. So the American sentries start calling, who goes there? You know how sound travels across the water, right? The British immediately know that they're under attack. They start firing on the first boat. In the first boat is one of Washington's wonderful young puppy officers who begged to go on the little adventure. He's killed. Wisner knows they're sitting ducks. These are his friends and neighbors. He says, you know what? I'm getting out of here. So he withdraws. What do you think Washington's reaction to that was? Not good. He was furious. This is a time period when he's extremely frustrated because he's trying to do fine surgery with a sledgehammer. He doesn't have the tools he needs. He was so angry. That house is called the Jewel Mansion. It still stands as a museum at Harlem Heights. That's where the court-martial of Captain John Wisner took place. You have the court-martial records. People in his boat that he knew said there was nothing he could do. We were just all going to get killed for nothing. People in the other boats are doing a CYA. It was all his fault. It was his fault. So the court-martial finds him guilty of not following orders, and he's cashiered. They do not command the standard penalty of execution. So they knew that he had been a seasoned commander and probably wouldn't have panicked. He made a probably rational decision. Going to go back to that other slide. This is Captain John Wisner Jr. Senior, I mean. Who's that? Henry Wisner, his brother. Continental Congress guy, and now his brother's being court-martialed. You can imagine what happened within the family circle at that point, right? Not good. So, Captain John Wisner's tribulations are not over, because Washington doesn't order him released so he can go home in disgrace. He's still a prisoner. Washington says to one of his aides, I want you to write. You write to those guys. The aide writes to the court-martial and says, so, we just wanted to let you know that this was really important and we're not sure you kind of made the right decision there. Washington is trying to interfere in the judicial process. Holy smokes, is there anything more relevant to the news cycle now? This is what you find. You cannot make this stuff up when you start looking at history. The court-martial writes back. What do you think they wrote back? We made the right decision. There were mitigating circumstances. And John Wisner is released to go home. We don't know what happened when he got home. My sense is that probably As he gets home, after dark, John, thank you saved my son's life. John, thank you so much, you saved all those guys. I don't think the community condemned him. I think they realized that he was responsible for the fact that all those guys were still alive. So that's an example. Getting into trouble, he broke the rules, he did. Doing the right thing. Nobody remembered that anymore. Nobody remembered his story. I think we should remember that. Okay, here's our last story. I'm not going to read this whole long thing to you. And I'm just giving you little samples of what's in this book. So we have a young person that joined when they were younger than one would think. But now he's 1851, he's up in Canada. What he's doing in Canada, I don't know. 1851, he's finally trying to get a little pension. His name is James Babcock, and he tells the entire story of his service during the Revolutionary War. That he resided in Warwick in New York in 1776 with a man named Philip Burroughs, who was a hard master and illy treated and misused him. What that tells us is that this person is either an indentured servant or an apprentice then, because he's putting up with being treated badly. His dad was in the army. He can't contact his dad. What happened to his mom, we don't know. But he feels at the mercy of this very unpleasant individual that he's in service to. And he was signed a contract. It was a form of enslavement for money. He can't just leave. He'll get whipped. So he's standing by the side of the road, and a man who's a continental officer rides by and says, "What's the matter?" He explains the situation and that he's in dire straits, and the captain says, "Well, come with me, I'll take you over to the Continental Army over on the Hudson there, we'll take care of you." We don't even know if James went back in the house to get his extra pair of shoes. He might have just swung up on the horse and back with this officer and ran off. How old is he? 86 in 1851. So he's born about 1765. When this happens, he's 10 or 11 years old. That's the age at which you would be apprenticed or be an indentured servant. They take him over there, they teach him how to drum. He seems to be in a much better situation, but of course he's jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, because now he's with the Continental Army. And he serves with them, and he ends up at the Battle of Monmouth. They let him join shortly after he got there. He actually enlisted, and he was not even really a teenager yet. And he didn't put him in the front line, but they let him drum. At Monmouth, he's wounded, and he has a problem with his ankle now, so they probably had not much use for him. So he came back up to Warwick and served with Hathorn's militia, where Philip Burroughs is a member of Hathorn's militia. So from his service, somehow he bought himself out, or the officers bought him out. Somehow he escaped punishment for running away from his service. And what he's remembering is things that happened that helped him and the other officers at the pension office tell when things happened. So he had good reason to dislike his master. That's why he joined. Where did he live when he ran away? That house. That's the Philip Burroughs house, corner State School Road and Kings Highway. You can't see it because of the evergreens very well. You got to pull safely off onto State School Highway to take a look at the house. That's the Phil Burroughs house. The people who live there keep it in great shape. It's just awesome. We should all send them a thank you and say thank you, thank you. But Philip Burroughs was not a bad man per se. He was a very difficult man. We have other stories about how very hard he was to get along with. He was a Scot. He was a crack shot. So we have a couple stories about his ability to pick off people. At the Battle of Minnesota, Hathorn supposedly said to him, "You get Grant. I want you to do it." Didn't succeed, but he was a great marksman. So that's the house. James Babcock is saying, "I remember General Washington well and how he looked. I remember how Andre looked when they executed him. He was there at the Andre execution. those memories, primary documents. That's what we're talking about with this project. So we are restoring lost legacies. And when this 250th comes up, we darn well better have a really big series of parties. There are a lot of really cool things happening. Those are the gravestones of John and Elizabeth. Elizabeth was an awesome lady. He was never at home. How they ended up with 11 kids, I don't know. We have things that prove that she helped him with his official correspondence when he was gone. She could read and write, and we have samples of her handwriting. Just completely awesome. So we have it's after the war, and we have a bunch of old veterans who are very, very proud of their service, even though they haven't been thanked by the country. They do things like raise liberty poles after the war because they don't like what the government's doing. They protested even after the war. Anytime they saw something going down in the government that they thought infringed on what they fought for, they'd put up a liberty pole and they'd have a right raucous time of it. They love to do toasts. They would write out 15 or 20 toasts. They would call the toast. They would drink. They would shout huzzah 3 times. They would have a volley of guns. Boom! Their toast would go on probably for 45 minutes. So let's hope these liberty poles are like off in somebody's field and not next to where you're trying to get the kids to sleep. So, to the spirit and memory of the heroes who fell in defense of liberty, may we, like them, fight with calmness, reason with calmness, fight with courage, and bring down tyrants. That's what they felt like in 1798. So that is part of your revolution.